So in order to facilitate a more sane method or a sane model of automation, what Uptime's done with the help of Xia Yu, of course, the product manager for vCenter Orchestrator, is we've created a plugin that will interact through an Uptime API that we've created specifically for Orchestrator to allow for some verbs. So if we actually look at these verbs, what are they? These workflows allow Orchestrator to interact with the monitoring solution and actually set up entities within Uptime. So for all of those hierarchies that you saw before, if you were going to auto-scale a front-end web cluster, for instance, you would definitely want visibility into that new cloned VM. You would want it to be filed in the right place, and you would want the monitoring solution to start monitoring not just the platform metrics of that new VM, but of course you would want the business tier as well. And you'll notice that we've carefully selected the verbs to do that. So if we actually look at this, we can see that it will interact with Uptime and return the correct output variables. And actually, without going into the details of what this particular object does, it does interact with a REST-based API, as I mentioned earlier, in Uptime, and allows for those automated actions to happen. Of course, as part of the package, we do have our own Uptime configuration, and we can see that it allows us to define the URI for the Uptime API calls, command calls, as well as for the authenticated user that allows us to execute these arbitrary actions on the Uptime platform itself. And of course, we wouldn't want to leave that unauthenticated, because then people could just go in and do whatever they wanted on our platform. So it does have full integration capability here. And just to give you an idea of what's possible, if we were to actually look at an example of, or really bring this home, if we look at this simple example in my particular Uptime instance, what we see is that we do have an Apache front end. If I click on it within Uptime, we can actually see that it is monitoring the Apache status. And Apache status consists of all the deep metrics in terms of total accesses, total kbytes served, what the CPU load of the server is, the number of sessions, so on and so forth. So Uptime is actively monitoring this web front end on behalf of us. And certainly as a response to too many users hitting it, we might want to fire a business policy workflow. So the example I've created here inside of Orchestrator is actually a composite of the existing workflows and our Uptime workflows. So what I'm going to do here is if we look at the schema of this workflow, we can see that in response to that particular Apache front end being saturated, what we might want to do is clone the actual virtual machine. We might want to update the round-robin DNS or update the front-end aggregator to actually allow for that new front-end to start taking up the load. And here we could see that in addition to that, I've added the workflows for Uptime verbs to allow it to create a view within Uptime, for it to add the agent system to Uptime. That means add the new virtual instance that's been provisioned into the Uptime monitoring system. Allow the element to then be added to a service group, which allows us to monitor the performance metrics of that Apache front-end tier, and certainly allow for that total end-to-end provisioning of that new front-end tier. Not only that, we're able to deprovision the dynamic infrastructure through a corresponding workflow that might be fired when the peak load is actually reduced. So let's actually simulate this particular run-through in a second. But before we do that, let's see how using this sample workflow that I created called VMware Rocks, how easy it is through what Xia Yu and your team has created. It is to leverage the package that we've installed, the VMware package, the Uptime package within VMware Orchestrator. By simply dragging and dropping the workflow elements, I can access those Uptime elements and quickly just do the drag and drop, link it into an existing workflow, and create our standard decision tree, and so on and so forth, as complex as we want. So very, very powerful functionality. So I'm not even going to save this because I know you guys are familiar with it. Usually with our clients who have been very receptive of this functionality, I do have to go into this a bit more. But let's see what would happen if I actually fired this. Now you may have noticed I added a sleep into this. There's a very good reason for that, because without the sleep, this would just execute so quickly that we don't even know what's going to happen. So if we could imagine right now that with Uptime, that application tier is saturated here, and that we're going to have to clone the VM, and the action profile within uptime was going to fire. Now I'll fire it manually for demonstration purposes, and we've added a bit of a sleep time here. So what I'm going to do is submit that, and what it's going to do is it's going to go and clone that Apache web server image here. So it's cloning it dynamically in response to what it's detected within uptime. Here we can see it cloning. It's finishing reconfiguring the DNS, and as soon as that VM's ready, what it's now going to do is it's going to run the workflow to add the system within uptime. So first thing it's going to do is create the view. So if I go within uptime and actually look at global scan, we're going to see that it's created that new view to organize the new infrastructure. It's created the new Apache, or actually added the new Apache instance for monitoring within uptime. It's actually added that instance to the correct view. And we can see it lives in here. Performance data is already starting to gather off of that newly provisioned VM. And we can see that it's actually gone ahead and added the entity to what's called a service group. And what does that mean? Well, we knew that the Apache instance, or this new VM, was running Apache. So as I actually click through and see that data is starting to come in, what I can do is go into services, go to service metrics, and see that uptime is going to start collecting all the performance metrics for that web tier as well. So it's going to monitor that, it's going to understand the health and performance of that new virtual machine, and it's going to know when it's going to be possible to run the deprovisioning. So what do we have here? We have a scenario where the dynamic infrastructure is not only provisioned within seconds in response to poor end user performance. What we actually have is a fully monitored solution, or fully monitored system that's been put up. Now the beautiful part about this is, even in our simple example, I think you could extend this to a wide variety of other use cases, including provisioning and deprovisioning in and out of a public cloud. So you'll see more from us on that later. That's certainly something that we mentioned to Shah, and we'll continue to work on getting you guys a demonstration of that as well. And just to close off that demonstration, clearly if you want it to be business policy aligned and allow uptime to trigger an action profile to deprovision that tier, well, when we go ahead and execute that workflow, and of course that would be automatically done through an action profile, we can see not only would that image be deleted from the virtual infrastructure, we can see that the monitoring solution through the API has totally wiped out the existence of that. So from an operational perspective, we clearly see what we've got. Now the last part of the integration that we wanted to show you, now this is a very much more condensed demonstration from what we showed Shah as well as some of your other colleagues in a live demonstration today, is the fact that we are integrated into the virtual infrastructure client as well. So if I actually look at this, we do have an Uptime plugin. When I click on that, it goes right into the Uptime interface. We can see I can interact with the application directly as I was from the web browser, so that we get that single cockpit, that single pane of glass within the vSphere client to allow virtual infrastructure admins to have that seamless end user experience. So that pretty much covers what we wanted to talk about today in terms of the integration of Uptime with vOrchestrator. Certainly, again, if you guys want a more detailed demonstration or a better understanding of what our product can actually do, feel free to contact myself, ken.chung, C-H-E-U-N-G, at uptimesoftware.com through Shah Yu, and we'll be happy to show you anything that you want to see. So thank you for your time, and hope